Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished board members and colleagues again. I take the opportunity to now introduce the lead evaluator for this evaluation, Mr. Alan Fox, who is joining me on the podium. It is our pleasure to present and discuss with you this work in support of disability inclusive development during the period 2008 and 2016, the period since the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, UNCRPD, has been in force. The salience of this topic to the mission of UNDP is clear and enshrined in the UNDP strategic plan to pursue equitable access to development opportunities and gains across the population, working with the poor and other excluded groups, whether women, youth, indigenous people, or the disabled, as agents of their own development. 15% of the world's population, 1 billion people, or 1 in 4 households, lives with disabilities. Despite this fact, people with disabilities continue to be marginalized, tend to be poorer, are often denied equal access to health care, education, employment, and other social services, and are especially vulnerable to environmental degradation and climate shocks. In this evaluation, we cover UNDP's strategic relevance, global positioning, partnerships, programming results, and institutional factors relating to disability-inclusive development. Our evaluation team visited 11 countries, conducted a survey of UNDP country officers, and reviewed a global portfolio of UNDP disability-inclusive programs and projects. Over the course of our work, 264 projects were analyzed in more than 100 countries to find initiatives relating to disability-inclusive development. Out of this overall sample, 120 projects across 85 countries were identified as paying sufficient attention to persons with disabilities to be included. Also, the evaluation team explored disability inclusiveness in 18 other international organizations, yielding additional practices for UNDP to consider. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, the evaluation set out 25 findings as the basis for 4 conclusions, covering the key areas of strategic and corporate positioning, global partnerships, UNDP programming, and UNDP internal culture and procedures. From the perspective of strategic and corporate positioning, we found that UNDP has not been a global advocate for the Convention, yet is very well positioned to support national efforts to adopt and implement the Convention. UNDP has yet to fully leverage itself as the trusted convener, knowledge broker, technical advisor, and facilitator of dialogue between governments, civil society, and national human rights institutions in support of the Convention, thus limiting its potential impact. With respect to partnerships, the evaluation focused especially on the UN partnership to promote the rights of people with disabilities. The UNRPD brings together 6 UN entities, governments, and disabled people's organizations to support the advancement of the Convention. UNDP hosts the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office and Technical Secretariat for the partnership and is an implementing partner. As of October 2016, this partnership had mobilized funds amounting to approximately $17.3 million. The UNRPD has gone through 2 funding rounds since 2012, supporting joint UN programs in more than 20 countries. A 3rd funding round for 10 additional country projects was launched at the end of 2016. We view the UNRPD as an effective vehicle for joint programming to help countries assess the actions they should take to implement the Convention and help build legal and institutional capacities. Between 2011 and 2016, UNDP provided targeted assistance on disabilities through 50 projects implemented across 29 countries. The total budget for these targeted efforts was over $75 million, with total expenditure to date around $22 million. In addition, some 69 projects from 70 countries specifically mention a mainstream component on disability-inclusive development. The evaluation found that UNDP programming is most effective in cases where there is clear national ownership and leadership in advancing the Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. UNDP support in these areas typically includes strategy development, an assessment of policy gaps, and efforts to revise legal systems and build government capacities. There is clear evidence that UNDP has helped governments adopt and implement the Convention and have helped to bring civil society actors, including disabled people's organizations, to the negotiating table on these matters. The evaluation also noted that in many countries, persons with disabilities are not a focus of substantial or sustained attention, and their rights and needs are not sufficiently mainstreamed across UNDP programming. It was noted that UNDP is not consistently advancing disability inclusion in its engagement with electoral processes and institutions. The evaluation highlighted a lack of practical guidance and lessons available within UNDP on how to address the complex social, environmental, legal and technical barriers to advance equal political participation and citizen engagement. The analysis of UNDP's culture, human resource procedure and facilities management has questioned whether UNDP is a welcoming organization for persons with disabilities. Whilst it has taken some positive steps, such as formulating a diversity and inclusiveness strategy, attention to implementing the strategy has been sporadic and ineffectual. Conditions of recruitment, hiring and employment present barriers for persons with disabilities, and UNDP has not taken the necessary steps to ensure that all its facilities are accessible. Taking into account the findings and conclusions from the evaluation of UNDP practices and acknowledging the practices of similar organizations, the evaluation provides 16 recommendations for UNDP. UNDP needs to deeply engage in disability-inclusive development as a niche with a high demand for its services as governments strive to harmonize legal and social protection systems in keeping with the CRPD and to implement the 11 disability-oriented targets of the SDGs. We recommend that UNDP pay attention to the rights of persons with disabilities in the next strategic plan and develop an action plan on disability. In addition, in its support of countries in SDG fulfillment, UNDP should pay special attention to disability-inclusive targets, emphasizing Goal 16. UNDP should revise its disability guidance note, articulating recommendations for program design and implementation that are aligned to the SDGs. In terms of global partnerships, we recommend that UNDP work with UN partner agencies and donors to expand funding of the UN RPD. UNDP needs to ensure that UNDAFs specify outcomes for targeted and mainstream programming that addresses implementation of the UN CRPD. Further, UNDP must deepen its partnership with disabled people's organizations. We have also provided recommendations to better mainstream the rights of people with disabilities into employment and livelihoods, crisis prevention and recovery, and electoral assistance support programming. There is also a need for more disaggregated data on disabilities. When it comes to UNDP's internal culture and procedures, the evaluation recommends UNDP to provide reasonable accommodation for employees with disabilities and to ensure through universal design that all persons, regardless of disability, can access its programs and facilities. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, we are encouraged by the positive management response to this evaluation and trust that the intended actions can help UNDP to become a true champion for disability-inclusive development. Thank you for this opportunity to present the evaluation. We look forward to comments and questions from the board following presentation of the management response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naid. And I'll turn to Mr. Martinez Soliman for the positive management response. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm pleased to present the management response. And I would like to thank the Independent Evaluation Office, Director Naidu, and the Task Manager for a detailed review, for many very useful recommendations, even if we don't share some of their more pessimistic views. When I presented initial remarks to the informal meeting of the board, to the informal consultation we had last week, I mentioned two premises which I hope are shared. One, that we should all do more and could do more, we can do more in this area. This has not been a front, right and center area for development organizations, and I think it is time that it becomes one, and we are very determined to do so if we receive the the appropriate go-aheads, the support, the political support, the policy support, the funding, the program countries request, and all that it entails. And secondly, I said that disability, or ability rather, is ultimately a temporary and fragile condition for those who enjoy it. And with these two ideas in mind, I wanted to remind ourselves that the decade started with the Convention, which has 170 parties to it to date, one of the fastest ratification paces of all human rights instruments in the UN realm. And since the adoption of the Convention, we have tried to play our part in helping to support its implementation through several means: policy, walking the talk inside of the organization, institutional capacity support to the member states we serve, financing tools and partnerships in over 98 countries, and hundreds of project interventions, as the director of the Evaluation Office has just illustrated. We distinguish our programming between mainstreaming efforts and targeted efforts. Some that where programs and projects which support equal opportunities and inclusion are part of a broader intervention. We've made targeted efforts in 29 countries in which work has focused directly on improving the conditions of persons with disabilities across the three thematic areas of the strategic plan. Let me give you an example from Albania. We support the whole convention cycle in the country, spanning the ratification process, helping the government develop its social inclusion strategy, revise its social protection policies, budget accordingly, improve data collection, draft new legislation in compliance with the convention. Then we have mainstream support to persons with disabilities in another 70 countries, where we assist governments to include persons with disabilities within wider development initiatives that target sectors, regions or issues, in particular access to services. Belarus stands out as a particularly good example of their policies in this regard. Or let me mention Rwanda, where we have supported the Union for the Deaf People to increase deaf youth participation in political processes and other such. We're also supporting specific health information services in Rwanda for deaf people. In Zambia, we partnered with civil society organizations representing persons with disabilities to participate in strategic planning, joint monitoring and evaluation of HIV response. That was the entry point then. And as a result, persons with disabilities have been included in the Zambian definition of key populations in the revised HIV strategic framework. In Bangladesh, what we're doing is provide technical assistance to the National Human Rights Commission in monitoring implementation of the Convention, and supporting government in developing an inclusive national social security strategy. Let me broaden this point. Partnerships with national human rights institutions in the implementation of the Convention and reporting obligations is something we do in a large number of developing countries and middle-income countries. It's one of the most frequent ways in which we help member states acquit themselves with their conventional obligations. In Egypt, we've focused on creating employment and internship opportunities. 600 young people living with disabilities in partnership with ILO are now interning in companies that have, in firms that have associated themselves with the scheme. We're also developing ICT solutions to facilitate access to vocational training and educational resources for youth and children living with disabilities. In Lebanon, one of the points that was mentioned in the evaluation, we have focused on persons with disability in the Lebanese Elections Assistance Project, which provides technical support to facilitate the participation of persons with disabilities in the election in consultation with the major local NGO representing people with disabilities. One final example from Azerbaijan, where we provide support to mine victims by integrating disabled survivors into economic activities. We've also provided support to their children's education, preventing school dropout that may lead to further exclusion. At a broader policy level, we have issued specific corporate guidance to our country offices on how to apply the Convention in programs and projects. Furthermore, we have issued a diversity inclusiveness strategy, taken other steps to improve our capacity to adequately attract, support and retain staff with disabilities at UNDP, including the development of an online course. Persons with Disability, Ability, Capability and Employability is the title of that course. We recognize that there is much room for improvement there. The course, by the way, provides insight in various issues regarding integrating and working with people with disabilities. It's not per se addressed to the people with disabilities, rather addressed to others who need to learn to work with people who live with disabilities. And it includes issues of reasonable accommodation and universal design. We will also be imminently launching a new talent acquisition program for young leaders with disabilities jointly with the UNVs, and have already signed agreement with specialized higher education institutions, for instance the Gallaudet University, to allow for internships not further away than in my office of hearing impaired young professionals. The UN Volunteers was in 2015 coordinating assignments for 188 online volunteers living with disabilities, half of them women, and the great majority from developing countries. Let me now turn to the findings and conclusions. I'd like to recognize that we do believe we are well positioned to play a prominent role in advancing the Convention at global and country level. We do also believe that we haven't given it our maximum effort. Some of our programming has been instrumental, in certain cases a major force, in helping develop and strengthen disability law and policy frameworks. We've effectively developed disability work where there's been a clear national ownership and leadership in advancing the Convention. Evidence shows that the UN partnership to promote the rights of persons with disabilities, which we serve as Technical Secretariat, has been a viable and innovative instrument to promote multi-sector interventions, and has achieved more outcome-level objectives than anticipated. And lastly, we welcome that UNDP's support and national efforts to achieve the SDGs provides an important opportunity to help strengthen the rights of persons with disabilities, noting that the SDGs contain multiple targets that disaggregate monitoring for people with disabilities and are indeed mainstream throughout the agenda. So again, the SDGs prove to be a very, very good framework. Let me finally turn to the specific recommendations. Recommendations 1 to 3 are very useful. We agree that greater prominence and attention to the rights of persons with disabilities is required to situate the organization, as the evaluation points out, as a leading provider of disability-inclusive development expertise. We will propose to the board the inclusion of disabilities as a very significant element of our new strategic plan. Contingent on the board's approval, we will ensure that disability-specific targets and indicators are considered in the integrated results and resource framework. And we will review and integrate disability inclusion, in particular, into our support to the implementation of Goal 16 of the SDGs, where access to justice, fairness in society, impacts from conflict and political participation are concerned. We also commit to revising, as has been recommended, and reissuing a better guidance to country offices on how to apply the Convention in programming in light of the SDGs. Our response to recommendations 4 to 6 is a welcoming one. We find that our role as the Technical Secretariat of the Partnership has added value to UN system-wide efforts to support implementation of the Convention. We will continue to facilitate discussions on scaling up funding to this mechanism. More UN work depends on member states' financial support, and we strongly encourage those who feel that way to make a contribution to the partnership. We welcome the recommendation to strengthen UNDAFs to address implementation of the Convention consistent with the SDGs. UNDP is certainly not alone in this effort. We want to mention very particularly UNFPA, UNICEF, ILO, WHO and UN Women, who have been terrific partners in this work. I'm sure I forgot somebody who is important. Pardon me if I did. Furthermore, UNDP commits to revisiting existing guidance and templates for program design and monitoring to ensure that our civic engagement strategy will involve consultations, including with the UNDP Civil Society Advisory Committee, which currently includes one member of the major Disabled Persons Coordination Organization. Finally, the response to recommendations 7 to 12, we welcome the recommendations related to specific areas of programming which are in line with the overarching approach of leaving no one behind, as we seek to eradicate poverty and amplify our efforts to significantly reduce all inequalities and exclusions. The ones related to disabilities are particularly damaging. This includes efforts to identify opportunities to strengthen disability inclusion across our corporate standards and tools and better capture progress in the ROAR. We will also develop additional guidance and tools to mainstream disabilities, including amending and integrating disability and vulnerability considerations in crisis preparedness and response support, post-disaster needs assessments and recovery plans following disasters, taking into account the specific rights and needs of persons with disabilities, as we did exactly after in the crisis response to Ecuador last year. We will continue advocating for all societal groups to have access to institutions and political processes and develop further tools and guidance on mainstreaming disability access in electoral assistance. I had omitted the response to recommendations 13 to 16, which is the last one. We agree with many recommendations related to our internal culture and procedures, have already taken some steps to improve our capacity to adequately attract, support and retain staff with disabilities. We will survey country offices to acquire a comprehensive overview of issues related to inclusion of persons with disabilities in UNDP, with due observance of confidentiality obligations. We will look into the establishment of a fund for reasonable accommodation, and furthermore will issue specific guidance on this issue for all country offices. We further commit to updating and rolling out a new version of both the UNDP Diversity and Inclusiveness Strategy and the online learning course on disability in UNDP. Other important steps include a disability audit of key human resource functions, policies and tools to foster employment and retention of persons with disabilities in UNDP. As mentioned, bringing young leaders with disabilities and finalizing arrangements with the UN Volunteer Programme as a mechanism to further engage and employ persons with disability are efforts underway. Let me conclude by acknowledging again the value of this evaluation and the dialogue with you, with our partners, with civil society. While the evidence points as UNDP taking the issue seriously and working in spite of constraints to become a more welcoming organization, we can and we will do more. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for that very thorough response from management. I think we should open now for comments. I want to turn your attention to the fact that we are nearing 1 o'clock p.m. and we need to finish this agenda item and finish this segment today and this morning. So I will encourage colleagues to be very focused, but we need to hear all that wants to provide contributions to this discussion. Australia, can I count on you now?
Thanks, Mr. President. I'm delivering this statement on behalf of Canada, Germany and my own country, Australia. We welcome the findings of the Strategic Evaluation of Disability Inclusive Development in UNDP and strongly agree that the next UNDP strategic plan should give greater prominence to the rights of persons with disabilities. Inclusive aid is effective aid. If we are to deliver on the aspiration of the SDGs to leave no one behind, people with disabilities must be able to benefit from and contribute to our development efforts on an equal basis with others. Importantly, the call for a UNDP action plan on disability that has clear goals, targets and indicators will be critical in providing institutional and systemic momentum for taking forward the other recommendations. We congratulate UNDP on its role as host of the United Nations Partnership to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. Since its inception in 2011, this partnership has driven significant improvements in the quality of life for people with disabilities, particularly in the areas of policy and legislative change at the national level. We encourage support for the work of UNPRPD and welcome the recommendation to broaden its financial support base by reaching out to new contributors, including the private sector. We also note that there are opportunities to leverage the results and lessons flowing from these projects to drive the further integration of disability inclusive development throughout the UN system. Making our development efforts as inclusive as possible is a responsibility for everyone in our organisations. Canada, Germany and Australia recognise the challenges of integrating disability across a large organisation with country and regional offices across the world. We are keen to share and learn from the experiences of partners to build the evidence base on effective interventions. Actions to make UNDP an organisation that is accessible to and welcoming of people with disabilities are a necessary complement to this work. Having access to a diverse range of staff with lived experience of disability strengthens an organisation's ability to achieve its priorities. We commend UNDP on their support for this evaluation and their measured and practical management response, which indicates broad acceptance of the recommendations. We look forward to continuing to work together towards our ultimate goal of contributing to real change for the better in the daily experiences of people with disabilities. In our national capacity, Australia is pleased to have financially contributed to this evaluation. This indicates the very high value we place on disability inclusive development. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Delegate of Australia for that statement. And now I turn to Delegate of Norway. You have the floor, sir.
President, I'm pleased to make this statement on behalf of Sweden and my own country, Norway. We welcome this useful evaluation of UNDP's contribution to disability inclusive development. We recognize that UNDP already has played an important role in this field, but also notes the numerous recommendations on how UNDP can improve its work. We certainly agree with the findings that UNDP is well positioned to play a prominent role in advancing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, both globally and at the country level. President, the 2030 Agenda makes 11 specific references to persons with disabilities or disability. This makes it even clearer that UNDP has to have an active, forward-leaning approach on this, as part of the efforts to leave no one behind. The next UNDP strategic plan should give greater prominence and attention to the rights of persons with disabilities. President, we appreciate how the statement by Australia highlighted highly relevant aspects of the evaluation. In addition to this, we would especially underscore the importance of follow-up on the recommendations related to the needs of persons with disabilities in crisis prevention, early recovery and post-crisis development planning, as well as the importance of incorporating disability in the forthcoming updating of UNDP's gender equality strategy. President, as contributors to the Partnership to Promote the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Multi-Donor Trust Fund, Norway and Sweden are very pleased to see that UNDP has been instrumental in making the partnership a success. This mechanism represents a good practice of UN reform by promoting collaboration at country level, as well as the integration of UN normative and operational mandates in keeping with the QCPR. According to the evaluation, there remains high unmet demand from UN country teams and partner countries to participate. We encourage other donors to contribute to the trust fund. Finally, we have learned from the report that an estimated 20% of the populations in UNDP program countries live with disabilities that have a direct impact on their daily lives. This is a strong reminder why this issue has to be on the agenda throughout UNDP as an organization, and we welcome the strong focus on inclusion in the 2016 Human Development Report, Human Development for Everyone, which will be launched in Stockholm in March. We would like to highlight the need for UNDP to ensure that learning becomes part of the DNA of the organization, and that the findings and recommendations of evaluations like this become known by all UNDP staff members. Awareness of this evaluation is particularly important, as UNDP should play a role on how to ensure effective disability inclusion and accessibility within your own organization. Finally, it would therefore be interesting to hear how UNDP throughout the organization will disseminate and raise awareness about the evaluation findings and plans for follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Norway, on behalf of Norway and Sweden. And next I'll call on the delegate of Mexico. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Es un hecho que para alcanzar el desarrollo sostenible es esencial incluir a todos y a todas, incluyendo a las personas con discapacidad, en las iniciativas de implementación de la Agenda 2030, en línea con el principio de no dejar a nadie atrás. En tal sentido, es indispensable fortalecer la participación de las personas con discapacidad y sus organizaciones representativas para aprovechar sus conocimientos técnicos para potenciar los resultados del PNUD en la promoción de un desarrollo que integre la discapacidad. México ha adoptado medidas con el objetivo de eliminar las barreras que impiden que las personas con discapacidad participen activamente del desarrollo social y económico. Como ejemplo de esto, en diciembre de 2016, en colaboración con el PNUD, la Organización Panamericana de Salud y el UNICEF, se anunció el arranque del modelo de atención y cuidado inclusivo para niñas y niños con discapacidad en el marco del programa de estancias infantiles para madres trabajadoras. Este proyecto impactará en la sensibilización de una población de 17,000 niños y niñas y sus familias y cuidadoras. Mi delegación confía en que el próximo Plan Estratégico del PNUD 2018-2021 establecerá metas, objetivos e indicadores claros que proporcionen más precisión sobre su trabajo en apoyo a la inclusión de las personas con discapacidad. Asimismo, es importante que se garantice que todos los marcos de asistencia de las Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo identifiquen a las personas con discapacidad como grupo vulnerable y se trabaje con un enfoque de derechos humanos. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much to Mexico. And next I'd like to call on the delegate of the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome this evaluation as an opportunity to assess UNDP's work on disability inclusion to date and to build on it. As the evaluation recognises, UNDP is well positioned to play a unique role in working with national governments to implement the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in national development plans, and particularly in relation to the achievement of SDG 16. We welcome the positive achievements of UNDP's work noted in the evaluation, for example, to develop and strengthen disability legal and policy frameworks, its social protection programmes, and to find entry points for mainstreaming disability in some country programmes. We note that the evaluation shows that UNDP has a lot more to do to play its full role in supporting national governments to implement the Convention, but we also recognise this is a challenge for the whole international development community, given how neglected this area has been. We welcome UNDP's commitment that the new UNDP strategic plan should give greater prominence to the rights of persons with disabilities, but also urge UNDP to develop an action plan on disability which has a realistic, phased approach to driving forward this agenda. In the UK, the Department for International Development has developed its own disability framework in 2014, which aims to build organisational capacity to understand and take forward action on disability and to guide effective programming, both mainstreaming disability into programming and disability-targeted programming. We would welcome the opportunity to share experiences and learning with UNDP, to work with you on integrating disability into the new UNDP strategy and on developing a specific action plan on disability, and also to learn from you about what has worked well and what has not. We would also like to work with others to develop an approach to track disability inclusive spend internationally and hope that UNDP will support this. Good data is a crucial starting point for disability inclusive programming so that people with disabilities count and are counted and their needs are understood. We therefore consider that it is essential to include disability-specific targets in UNDP's new Integrated Results and Resources Framework. Beyond this, we would welcome more information on how UNDP will make best use of the Washington Group questions and how it will work with UNFPA to ensure disability is included in census work. We'd like to take this opportunity to highlight 3 further areas where we think UNDP needs to strengthen its efforts in response to the findings from this evaluation. Firstly, we'd like to see an increase in expertise on disability in UNDP. For example, we'd like to know whether UNDP has plans to train staff as disability experts and to establish senior disability champions. Secondly, we would also urge UNDP to work more closely with disabled people's organisations at country level as well as centrally. We have learnt that involving disabled people's organisations and people with disabilities in the design, delivery, monitoring and evaluation of development programmes is critical to addressing their needs effectively and for tackling stigma. Finally, country-level leadership of UNDP's programmes to translate policies into action will also be essential. For example, the evaluation notes that there is limited awareness of the Programme for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities mechanism across UNDP. We would like to know what UNDP can do to encourage more active country-level leadership on disability-inclusive development by country representatives. In conclusion, we have learnt that embedding disability into every aspect of our work takes time. We cannot do everything immediately, but we can all do more. We would urge UNDP to take a structured approach to transforming themselves into a disability-inclusive organisation, and we stand ready to support you in these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are really running short of time. So Finland has asked for the floor, and then if no other member states, observer states, we have also, as I said, from a civil society organization. And we only have 5 minutes, so I have to ask you to be very, very brief.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I will deliver this statement on behalf of Switzerland and my own country, Finland. We thank UNDP for this opportunity for dialogue on the very important issue of disability inclusion and commend the organisation for its significant contribution to inclusive development and to the realisation of human rights of persons with disabilities. We are pleased to take note of the positive reviews on the UN partnership to promote rights of persons with disabilities and the work of the Technical Secretariat. We find it very promising to hear that UNPRPD has achieved more outcome-level objectives than was anticipated. Evidence such as the value for money assessment of UNPRPD by Australia in 2014 suggests that participation by the UN country teams in the UNPRPD calls for proposals has served as a mechanism as to strengthen awareness of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with disabilities, and that it has facilitated mainstreaming of disability awareness across participating UN agencies. We think this is an excellent result. Awareness of the UNPRPD should therefore be systematically strengthened across UNDP, and the country offices should be encouraged to take part in the UNPRPD calls for proposals. However, serving as the Secretariat for the UNPRPD and being a member of the partnership is not enough. In order to leave no one behind, UNDP should mainstream inclusiveness into its modus operandi. We strongly agree with the notion that UNDP is strategically positioned to advocate for disability-inclusive development and to advance the CRPD at both global and country levels. We urge UNDP to take full advantage of its role in the resident coordinator system in this regard. We recommend UNDP to further strengthen its human rights-based approach to formulation of UNDAFs, to more explicitly focus on the realization of the CRPD obligations and the key human rights principles of non-discrimination, inclusion and participation across the UNDAF as well as the UNDP country plans in order to be able to deliver the promise of leaving no one behind. Article 32 of the CRPD requires states parties to ensure that all their actions within the framework of international cooperation are inclusive and accessible to people with disabilities. UN agencies and the country teams have an essential role in enforcing, implementing and monitoring this. What measures is UNDP planning to take globally and at country level to ensure that persons with disabilities and their representing organizations are actively engaged in the processes? We hope that future strategic guidance for the organization would include persons with disabilities in situation analysis and consider them as partners and targeted beneficiaries, sectors and components with high disability relevance, that is health, education, WASH, social protection and access to justice. We encourage UNDP to increase the number of disability-specific programs at country level with appropriate funding and to ensure that disability mainstreaming becomes a standard element of programming. Naturally, mainstreaming requires resources, capacity and accountability mechanisms. And we ask, what concrete measures is UNDP planning to take in order to strengthen disability mainstreaming across the organization under the period of the new strategic plan? Mr. President, we would also like to stress the importance of data and statistics. We encourage UNDP to collect, as part of its own reporting, information about resources allocated to disability inclusion, including disability-specific funding and mainstreaming, and to create disability-inclusive indicators to measure how the programs benefit or are able to target persons with disabilities. One important tool in this would be systematic collection of disaggregated data. Finally, we note that women and girls with disabilities are often at a greater risk of poverty, exclusion and discrimination. To counter these risks, we encourage UNDP to consider an intersectional approach in its strategies, guidance and programming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 1 minute left, if no other, and I kindly ask the interpreters to just stay for a few minutes more, because I would like to give the word to Mr. Vladimir Cook from the Executive Director of the International Disability Alliance, and after that I will release the interpreters.
Great. Thank you very much, President. Thank you very much, everybody, for giving us a chance to speak today. I'm speaking on behalf of the global network of organizations of people with disabilities that brings together more than 1,000 DPOs, disabled people's organizations from 182 countries of the world. We would like to really welcome this review evaluation that has been done, which is coming very timely at the beginning of the implementation of 2030 agenda, and when we celebrate 10 years of CRPD. We saw this process to come to this, this report as very thorough, transparent, comprehensive, and really wonderful in terms of bringing the voices and the positions of people with disabilities. We felt we really worked with UNDP in this process. This speaks in favor that UNDP is ready to scale up its work on the rights of persons with disabilities. Further, we believe that UNDP is really prominently placed to play more significant role in promoting and advancing rights of persons with disabilities. From many of our members, we heard that when UNDP engages, it is really done very well, and there is a strong technical support from the UN country teams to governments at the national level. So we are welcoming this, and we want to see more of this, obviously. In terms of UNPRPD, we need to recognize that UNDP actually made UNPRPD, and we cannot forget this significant role that UNDP play. It is not only that UNDP is housing secretariat, but it is really much more. We recognize positive findings from the review. However, we feel that UNDP can and should do much more when it comes to promoting rights of persons with disabilities. For us, it seems that from the evaluation that more can be done in tracking and learning on what really UNDP does. And we heard that before from number of respondents. So it will be wonderful to really invest more into developing a disability tracker to truly know what UNDP does, and this can be served as example for the entire UN system. Looking ahead at the next strategic plan, needless to say that we would like to see significantly more prominent visibility to the rights of persons with disabilities. And to achieve this, I would like to propose that this strategic plan should be little bit developed in consultation with organizations of persons with disabilities. When we speak about DPOs, I would like to highlight that will be important that in the UN country teams, UNDP engages more and work more closely with organizations of people with disabilities. As it is mentioned, we are welcoming the fact that we are sitting on the Civil Society Advisory Committee, which is a wonderful first step. To achieve all of this, I believe that that UNDP should establish a disability technical unit, so not 20% of someone's time, but really unit that will have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 people working on really following all of this. There is a wonderful recommendation about surveying UNDP staff, which should be done also in support from this unit. As many of other recommendations, I don't see them possibly being fully implemented if we don't have somebody inside the UNDP that will be very knowledgeable. I would like to strongly recommend that this team is led by the senior person with disabilities, as was done in different organizations, and we recognize this as a very successful model, and maybe the only way to really mainstream rights of people with disabilities. Either remain committed to work closely with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very valuable input. I thank also the interpreters for keeping on. You're released now. We have come to the end of the session. We have the briefing on the strategic plan. I know that leaves us with a very unsatisfactory thing that we don't really have time for management responses, but I think we already have a very thorough management response in written. We had a very good introduction from Mr. Suleiman and also from Mr. Naidu. So I will take it as the President's prerogative to say we have to finish this segment now. Thank you very much for very valuable inputs from delegations. And thank you. I'm told that the UNDP management will be happy to deliver some response in writing and circulate as a reaction to some of the concrete questions that were made, and I think that's very valuable. Thank you very much for that. And so we will take it at that. Now, as you know, we have first of all, I should inform that there's a draft decision, and we will take action on that later in the week. Right now, we will adjourn, and then we will meet again, hopefully in conference room 5, 1:15, for a briefing on the strategic plan, UNDP strategic plan 2018 to 2021. So with that said, this segment is adjourned. Thank you very much.